All right, recording is started. And all right, this is part 3. So on Wednesday, we did parts 1 and 2, which was going over the admin menu in part 1, and user administration was part 2. Part 3 is indicator and dataset administration. And then part 4 will be, I guess I have this on this overview outline. Part 4 will be for indicator views. And so let's get into it. Indicator reports. So I have this introductory stuff in here just for posterity in case this recording, in case you want to use it some other time. But we know what health indicators are. It's designed to summarize information, and it's quantitative, objective information. Typically one measure with one definition. So there were times in Utah where people wanted to like cram a bunch of different measures into an indicator report, like let's look at tuberculosis and then have a view for all antibiotic resistant diseases and blah, blah, blah. It's like, no, let's use a story page for those kind of things. For indicator reports, it's typically 1 or 2 measures, like crude and age adjusted, and a bunch of slices of the data for those measures or that measure. We also like to provide important contextual information, because the example I always like to use is that series. There was a British sci-fi series. What was it called? And where there was a supercomputer that was computing the meaning of life. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, that's what it was called. And they had a gigantic computer computing the meaning of life, the universe, and all that. And at the end of the show, it comes up with the answer, and the answer is 42. And I just think that's hilarious. And of course, without any context, it has no meaning, which was kind of why it was hilarious. Okay, so we like to provide context so that our users can understand what the numbers mean. And, you know, one of those things are, you know, your program activities. So if you're in a program that does research on a topic or provides services for a health issue, go ahead and toot your horn and let's, you know, get that information out there. And then evidence-based practices, I think, are also really important. So that if someone knows they have a poor score, if you want to call it a score, we can also show them, give them tools for improving their community health status. Okay, this is just an example. Teen birth rate, it's been dropping. Here it is by states, here it is by county. So those are 3 different data views for teen births. One measure, teen birth rate per 1,000 girls, shown 3 different ways. And the other way that indicators are used are in our community reports. And just a heads up that we're coming up with a new, Garth has put the community reports into the Kendo grid, and it's pretty cool. He also fixed a couple of issues that we were having. And so look for that change soon. Okay.
How is it going to change?
So putting it into a Kendo grid means that you can sort by any column. You can do it's like on the query result or on the indicator page itself, you can hide columns if you don't want to see them. And then he also has like if you want to like not compare to the US, you can hide that column, these columns, but let's say you want to compare Bernalillo County or you want to compare the counties in a health district. You can put all those counties up here and look at those values, for instance.
Hey, Lois.
Pretty cool.
Speaking of comparing to the U.S., we don't have any U.S. data in our measures. Is that?
Yeah, I'm thinking your default community report should just remove those columns.
Or we could. I mean, I think we could probably obtain the rates.
Oh.
I'd like to find out how to put them in.
Oh, that'd be great. If you put them in, they'll just show up.
I don't know where to put them.
Yeah, where do we put them in?
In the indicator report. So this is
all
based on indicator report data. You don't have to do anything special for this report to work.
Okay.
It's just using the data that are published already.
Well, I did not realize that. So anytime I update an indicator, that means the community page is going to update automatically?
Yes. That's right.
I never made that little connection in my tiny brain.
Yeah, we haven't done much looking at the community report, so.
No, but I heard that the regional EPIs really like them and that's like what they look at all the time.
Well, that's good. We should it's on my to-do list to try to update some of these measures, indicator reports that are a little out of date.
I had another question, just real quick about kind of understanding like how everything works together. So in order to even have the information you need to update an indicator report, does that always rely on having like a working query module updated first?
No, you can put any data in the indicator for the indicator report in the admin site. So we have indicators in here that aren't, that we don't have queries for, like syphilis rate.
Well, that would be like an EPI sends you like their latest stuff. I guess I've seen that before.
Or unemployment, poverty rate. You know, there are a number of indicators that aren't in the query system. You know, the query system makes it easier. So I always, if it's in the query system, I always update that and then do the indicator report, but it doesn't have to be that way.
Okay.
All righty. So the first thing you need to do is plan, because if you just get into the admin app, it's going to ask you for information that you don't have ready if you haven't done a little planning. So here's my little getting ready slide. I have a little grid that I use, and I fill out these cells. You know, what do I want the name to be? So that doesn't show up to the public. That's just that unique identifier. What do you want the title, the indicator title, and the concise title? What measure do you want to use? This is one, sometimes I'll jump in and start filling something out, and then it's like, oh, I need the measure name. That means I have to jump over to the admin menu and pull down the measure list and get the name of the measure, not the title. You know, I have to use the name. And then the measure title override. So I think we talked about this at our last training, but you know, I put a bunch of really specific survey measures into the measure list, like percentage, low birth weight, and our survey measures, percentage smokers, percentage diagnosed with diabetes. And then I decided there were just too many and it was unnecessary. And so now I tend to use, and I'd like us to use, the more generic measures. So this is a percentage measure. It's not age adjusted. This one, youth risk homeless, that I was creating when I did these slides, this part of the slide presentation. It's a percentage. It's not age adjusted, and the desirable direction is low. So we would like homeless youth, the percentage to be low, the percentage with housing instability. But if it were age adjusted, I'd use an age adjusted measure. And if it had a different desirable direction, I'd use either just percent, if there's no direction that's desirable, like percent Hispanic or something like that. Or if it's like percentage with prenatal care, it would be percent desirable high. And again, as a reminder, these measures have, if it's age adjusted, it'll put that age adjusted data note into your indicator report. So measure, what do you want the override to be? Because if it's a generic measure, it won't have, it'll just say percentage. But it would be better if our graph y-axis and map legends and titles had a little more information, a little more detail. Okay, data sources, numerator and denominator. For this one, it's both the single survey. Related topics, think about where you want it to fit with topics, owner user ID, and org unit for the indicator. So those are the things I like to go in and be prepared with. So let's look at this name. And when you go in and create a name, there are some considerations. It's every table in the admin database has a name field that is a unique identifier for all the records in that table, in that particular table. So when you create a new indicator, you need to consider what you want the name to be. And typically, I try to group things so that the first part of the name would group it with other similar things. So if it's cancer, I wouldn't have incidence of cancer, INCID CA or something. I'd have cancer, INCID, and then it would be grouped with the other cancer indicators. And then we have some naming conventions. I have a whole list of naming conventions that I will share. Let me make a quick note of that. Indicator name conventions. Okay. So, and then there are other just really detailed things. We use camel case. And for instance, beginning with a capital and every syllable, if you would. Food insect starts with a capital. All the other letters are lowercase. You can't have special characters or spaces. The valid names have characters A through Z, 0 through 9, and you can use an underscore character, but you cannot use any of these characters. And I think when you go in to the app, and if you look in the help, it has a list of those characters that you can't use. So, and then abbreviations that are acronyms, you can do all uppercase. So if it's, you know, BMI or other acronyms, you can use all uppercase with those. Okay. So the title and concise title are on the indicator report data record. So here's an example: complete health indicator report of alcohol, adult binge drinking. This is the title that shows up in the index. And at the top of the page, if you're on the summary report or the complete report. So in the admin application, the core detail for the indicator when you're on the indicator list and you click on an indicator, there's an indicator detail, I think it's called, page. And on that page are 4 tabs. And the core detail tab is where the main title is and the concise title. So one thing about titles is that for each graph and map, the titles are automatically generated and begin with the concise title. So in this example, all of the graphs would begin with this string, binge drinking past 30 days. This is the base title that's used when building an automated title for any of this indicator's data views. Titles are completed with additional information about what the data visualization consists of, stratification variables, and measurement period. So here's an example, or here for that example. Alcohol, adult binge drinking for the summary report. This is the indicator title. But for the county data view, it uses the automated title, binge drinking past 30 days, by county, and the period title. So concise title from the indicator, view title from the indicator view, and period title based on what your measurement period is for your data. Okay. And again, you can use those question marks to try to get information. This one has a lot of information on how, what the rules are for putting together the automated title. And just in case you were not aware, if you don't like the automated title, for some reason it's not unique or it doesn't give you what you want, you can override it in the data view, and we'll get into that in the next training. But just so you know, you're not stuck with it if you don't like it. Okay, so here we are on the core detail page still, and you can provide this text as you're setting the indicator up, or you can just leave the default text in there and save it and move on. I think for each of these, when you do a new indicator that comes up and there's like a, let me look real quick. I'll show you. Indicator list, add new. Hello. This data input needed. You can leave that default text in there and save it and come back later and fill those in if you'd like. But they are required fields. And again, the help buttons will give you some good guidance. I also want to point out that I think for each of these, maybe all of these, you have this suggested length and maximum length. So definition, maximum length, 1,000 characters. If you go over 1,000 characters, it won't save. If you're, wait, let me back up. It won't let you type in more than 1,000 characters. If you get to the end of the limit and you try to type in more, it won't let you add more. If for some reason more than 1,000 characters got in there, like I think this has happened when we imported the data from the 2.3 data set, sometimes there are more characters in a field than are actually allowed. I think you can save it. I can't remember, but you can't add to it or modify it unless you get it down to 1,000 characters for this one. You should be able to do what you need to do within the limits. Why important? 4,000 characters. Here's one, and this is a lot of information, 648 characters. I don't think we expect our users to read more than that. Also, definition is a tricky one. Sometimes people want to put everything into definition, where really what we want there is just something really clear and concise for the user. So here, this is the percentage of respondents to the survey whose drinking pattern met the definition of binge drinking. See data note. So for the more information, this indicator has a data note for each view that defines the drinking pattern that is binge drinking. All righty. Any questions so far?
No, but I think I know what you're talking about. I think when it auto-populated from 2.3, especially for the birth defects, the definitions were really messed up.
Yeah. Yep. And so the initial, and tracking is a little different in its audience and purpose, but for the initial purpose, this was intended to just, for a naive user who doesn't know what numerator and denominator mean, what is 42? Just what is it? Please, just tell me what it is. Okay.
No, yeah, I agree. That's the way it should be. But whoever done it previously,
yeah.
I don't know.
Okay, going across the top, then in that indicator detail page, there are tabs for how are we doing and what are we doing, which, they're pretty self-explanatory, and more context. I think this is where the evidence-based practices text gets entered. So I, again, highly encourage that. But on this other tab, there are two important things. One is the default view, but you won't have any views if you're just first setting up an indicator, creating an indicator. So this is one place where you have to come back to define this after you have created one or more views. I don't think it will publish without a default view. And then the other thing that's on here is the org unit. And you click the drop down and you see a list of all the titles. And I've tried to make these unique, but they aren't all unique. I don't know what each of these is, but you can go to the list. There are 42 org units, and you should be able to kind of try to figure out which is which. And maybe there's more text over here that I can't see. I can't remember. But anyway, so the org unit, what that does is puts information in the footer of the indicator report page. So every individual indicator report page has its own little footer above the website main footer. So do you want to see that, or do you know what I'm talking about?
I'd like to see it.
Yeah, I can't picture what you're talking about.
Okay. So here is diabetes prevalence, and you scroll to the bottom and there's a little footer here that's not the main website footer. This is the org unit contact information for the Diabetes Prevention and Control Program.
So how would we edit that?
You would go to the admin menu and go into the org units.
Ah, okay.
And see, here's these three that look the same. I think you just have to kind of test them and see. But so cancer, right now it's Srikanth.
Okay.
And I think, you know, these go out of date and it's hard to keep them all up to date. So, but that's how you change it and edit it and update it from the admin menu. Okay.
I have kind of like I guess a big level question, which would be like, what occasions happen to get a new indicator created? I mean, does that come like from another department requesting it, or from like, you know, new like national measures? Or I was just trying to think of like, when would I ever need to create a brand new indicator from scratch?
Well, we have a lot already. And I recommend not creating anything you don't plan to maintain. But
Yeah.
one thing that, for instance, we've talked about is, and this was years ago, for Dan Green, he thought it would be cool to have a community report for YRRS indicators, YRRS measures. We don't have that many YRRS measures in IBIS, but if he wants a community report for YRRS measures, we could talk with him about what he would want, what indicators he would want in that community report, and then we'd have to create new indicators to flesh it out.
Cool, but I'm not doing anything for him until he gives me new data.
I know, right? The other thing is so I did this community process a few years back, a couple years back, where we looked at the community health status indicator list, and we chucked some off the list and added some new ones. So that there are some indicators under development that have not yet been put in IBIS. And these are things that the community wanted. And those are things that I think would be pretty high on our priority list. So one of them was the kindergarten immunization, childhood immunization rate for kindergarten entry. That's something the immunization program allegedly has. And it would be great to have that in there, because childhood immunization is, you know, I think we just have state level information. I don't know if we even have county information anymore, because we don't do CASA.
They have something where what did they do? They talked to a bunch of schools and made some Excel spreadsheets and got numbers per the schools, but then Ken said he didn't think we could use that. So like we didn't pursue that.
But there are other things on that list that
Yeah.
I can't think of right now, but I think I've shared it with you. And if I haven't, let me know and I can put my finger on it. So, and then for tracking new indicators, I think Chelsea has a few that she wants to create now. Cold-related illness.
Yeah, I think, was there one or two cold related illness for Brian, Stephanie?
Probably two hospitalizations and
Oh, and ED.
but that's, I think that's all we have
Yep.
outstanding right now.
Great question. Okay, so let's see. On that same main page, there's a sort order and is active. Sort order controls the order of indicators on this main selection list. And I always use a sort order of 1 for everything that's active. And then 99 for things that have been moved to the inactive list. So I move them to 99 and I mark them inactive. And I don't know if you know this, but if an indicator is marked active, you can publish it. If it's inactive and you publish it, it removes it from the lists that get used, the indexes. So the data are still in there. They're still in the database. The XML files are still on the server, I think, too. But you just can't navigate to them. Oh, and then on the main indicator list page, the actual sort order on this page is by title, not by name. So you can see here, there are some cardio indicators that start with the word acute. So they get first on the list, but that's the way it is. Unless you want to do something more involved with sort order. And sometimes the indicator editors and owners change their sort order because they're only looking at a subset of indicators and they want them to appear in a certain order. And it kind of drives me crazy because it's hard to find stuff when they mess them up, but mess them up. But then the other thing is, if you want to find an indicator on this list, since it's pretty long, just do a Control F and start typing in the name, and it'll find it pretty easily. So I don't know. You can do with sort order whatever you guys decide you want to do, but giving everything a 1 is what I have done in the past. All right.
And so when if somebody goes along and messes it up, like if we're looking for aren't tracking indicators on the bottom of the list?
No, they're all mixed in.
Oh, okay. Okay.
No, they are all mixed in.
I think it's the, when you select like the relevant topics that the tracking's all at the bottom.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Thank you.
That's correct, and that's where we're going next. So let's see. This is that indicators detail button, which is where we've been, the tabs we've been looking at. Available services and more resources are pretty self-explanatory, so I'm not going to go into detail there. And I'm going to skip to related topics. So oh, and there's also pretty good pop-up text when you go into these pages on the admin site. Okay, so in NMIBIS, and NM tracking. Indicator reports are grouped under topics because we think that it's a good way for end users to navigate to information they're looking for, you know, starting with a broad topic and then drilling down. On the topic page of the admin app, you can select one or more topics for any indicator. And in NM IBIS, once the indicator report has been published, it will appear in the list of indicator reports for those topics. And I can't remember how tracking works, if it works the same way or if yours is manually controlled, Stephanie. Do you want me to check?
Yeah, I don't remember.
Let's take a quick look. So, now.
And this is where we get into trouble because oh, you're looking at the topic pages, not the indicator topic pages.
Right. So here's the reproductive and birth outcomes topic page. And what I'm thinking is select an indicator report. Are these manually controlled or are they automated by virtue of being having that topic listed? I think the topics are automated on your site also.
They're on the selections page, and I think most of them were populated by Garth. So when we create them, we put them on the selections page. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah, whether you have to manually put them in your selections.
Yeah, if we create a new selections file, we have to do that.
Okay. Because in NM IBIS, it happens automatically that this list includes everything. So this is the tobacco use topic page screenshot, and everything with a related topic of tobacco use will come up on this page. All right. So the topic selection page, here's where you were talking about the tracking indicators being underneath. So these are topics. These are the NM IBIS topics when you go to the related topics page for an indicator report. And for alcohol binge drinking, 3 topics have been selected: alcohol use, mental health, and substance use. And no tracking topics. Now, it's important for your indicator report that if it's on NM IBIS, you choose from this list and not this list. If it's NM tracking, you choose from this bottom list and not something from the top. Because what happens is, if, for instance, you have an infant mortality indicator report and you select mothers and infants over here, it's over here somewhere. I thought it was, I don't see it. But anyway, there's a topic, MCH, mothers and infants. If you select this topic on NM IBIS, the link to that topic is a relative link, and that link won't work with in NM tracking. So if a user's in the NM tracking app and it tries to go to this page, it won't, they'll just get an error. But
So say there was an indicator report that we would like to have duplicated on, like demographic characteristics,
like
for
child
instance.
poverty is on,
Right.
we want to use it in both places. I have to check into that
Right.
and get back to you. I did not
Okay.
have time to do that today.
Okay.
But I will. I'll make a note. And I won't spend too much time digressing because we'll try to get through this before Chelsea has to leave. Okay. So moving along to indicator data sets. When you are creating an indicator, before you can create views, you need to create a data set, one or more data sets. So a data set is defined by 3 elements: an indicator, a measure, and a numerator data source. I guess it's actually the numerator denominator data source combination, but anyway, indicator, measure, and data source. And I have pretty good notes in this slide presentation, and I will send you the slides again. So you can't use the same data set for multiple indicators. And if your indicator has more than one data source, each data source will have its own data set. So, well, we'll get into this. And then if it uses more than one measure, like crude and age adjusted, each measure will need its own data set. Or data sets, if that, for a given measure, you have more than one data source. Now, let's see. So the concept to think about is within a given data set, the numbers, the values are directly comparable. So you wouldn't compare a crude rate to an age-adjusted rate. It's not meaningful to do that. And then the issue with the data source is that on your indicator report, the data sources is connected to the data set. So whatever data set is being used for that indicator view, that's where the data sources come from on the report page. So you don't need a data set for each graph or data view. If all the graphs have the same data source and are using the same measure, you can create all your data views from a single data set. So you just need a new data set if you have a new measure or a new data source. And then this is another one where we need a little preparation. Decide what the measure will be, because there's a naming convention for the data set, and you'll be required to enter the name and title. And so for the name, you need to know the measure and the numerator data source. And then also for setting it up, you want to think about how many years you'll be using and which years, and which are you using, single years for a trend view, and will the county data be 3-year grouped or 5 years grouped? So you need to think ahead a little bit before you create your data set.
So Lois, would there be separate data sets for, like, say you're reporting on one survey and you have both 1 year, 3 year, 5 year, or no?
No. No, so the
as long as
number of
it's
years, you
stored?
can have different year combinations in a single data set.
Okay.
It's only if there's a different measure or a different data source, then you need a different data set. So you need at least one data set to have a data view. Data values within a data set are directly comparable and come from the same data source. And the three elements that define a data set are indicator, measure, and data source. So some examples. Okay, so for our indicator, we can have measure 1 and measure 2. For instance, age adjusted and crude. For age adjusted, we can have a New Mexico data source and a US data source, and the same for crude. So for a concrete example, if we look at diabetes prevalence, the trend data view, so assume I'm setting up this indicator and I'm thinking about what data sets I'm going to need. And I don't know that it's necessarily best to have your list of all of your views and start thinking about, everything you need. I would just start with a view and create your data set or data sets for that view. And then when you go to the next view, think, okay, will this view, can I use the data? Can I use the same data set, or is it a different measure or data source? Okay, so for
That graph
this,
right there, I would think that 2017 might have an error in it. Doesn't that look weird to you?
yeah, it was just a weird year. It's not an error.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got New Mexico and US age adjusted rates. So we have a single measure, age adjusted percentage, and two data sources. So that suggests that we need two data sets. One for age adjusted percent for state and age adjusted for the US. It turns out for this, not for this view, but for this indicator, we have a view that is going to use age and sex as a view. So for this diabetes prevalence indicator, we do need a third data set, but we don't have a US comparison, so we don't need a fourth data set. So here's our data sets that we created for diabetes prevalence. So there's, and here's the naming convention is indicator, measure, and data source, because those are the three elements that make up a data set. Now, percent age adjusted diagnosed diabetes is one of those many measures that I created before we got far enough along for me to realize that I didn't want to do that. But changing the data set name is complicated and probably pointless. I mean, I'm German and I like everything to have a place and a place for everything. And I'm tempted to do this, but it touches a lot of different tables in the admin database, and it would take a lot of time. And there's too big of a risk that I'd mess something up. And it's just the unique identifier. So I have to take a breath and say, okay, I changed the measure from this one to just the more generic measure, but I'm going to live with it being with the name not representing the correct measure. So that's my little diatribe on my control freak German needs.
You
All right.
lost me a little bit there. Like, what would you call it instead if you were going to change it?
The measure name is Percent AA desirable low.
Oh, so you would just take diabetes out of it.
Oh no, it would be diabetes prevalence dot PCTAA desirable low dot BRFSS. So
Yeah, I just meant
this
you would take the diabetes out of the second part.
no, it would say percent AA desirable low.
Right, but not DIAB.
Right, and not DX, DIAB.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the title has a naming convention too. I can't remember though what it is and if those are correct or not, but yeah, I think those are also incorrect. But it, you know, for what it does, it's okay because it's not seen by the end user. And the main difference is age adjusted versus crude and the data source. So those are the three I created, or Wayne. No, I think I created this for Wayne for his diabetes prevalence. Wayne doesn't have admin rights, so he can't create it. So I must have, or it got created when we pulled the data across from 2.3. Okay, so whoops. So data sources appear for the data view, for every data view, based on the data sets or datasets that are being used. So for that trend data, we had a data set that used the state BRFS and the CDC BRFS. And data issues may also be associated with a data set. So for instance, for the BRFS, this same data issue applies to every indicator that uses the BRFS. So since it's what's the word for that? Applies to everything, all indicators
Universal?
that use it. Pardon me?
Universal?
Universal, thank you. Since it's universal for all BRFS indicators, we would use the same data issue text. And so we can associate it with the data source. So that's what we do. And the data source is from the data set. So that's why this gets on the indicator report. All right, so in the admin menu, there's a data source page. And for BRFS, the data source detail, here you can see the title. That's where we pick it from the pick list in admin, the text for the data source, and the data issues and the URL. So that's all connected to the BRFS data source. And so I want to create another data view for diabetes prevalence, and it's just by race, ethnicity. And it turns out that I can use the same data set because this is the age-adjusted percentage desirable low for this indicator using the same data source. So I can just add it to that data set. So that's where I get this. Did I do that? No. Crude rate, diabetes deaths. Oh, no, diabetes deaths. That was prevalence. Now, if we look at deaths, we have a similar thing, age-adjusted and crude, State Bureau of Vital Records and Health Statistics, and CDC Wonder crude rate is only using the state vital records. So for diabetes deaths, the data set list looks pretty similar, except it's just different data sources and different measures and a different indicator. So similar, but totally different. Okay. Oh, no, that's okay. So data sources, so these are the data sources for the age-adjusted rate for the diabetes death indicator. So in the data source, you can see you have to choose, or the data sets, data sources, you have to choose a numerator and a denominator. For surveys, they're the same, but for other things, I don't want to say typically they're different, because sometimes they're different, sometimes they're not. But in this case, they're different. We have the Geospatial and Population Studies Program denominators, and the Vital Records Death data set is the numerator. So going down the list, oh no, not yet. Oh, these are the data sources and data issues. And you can see, so for the diabetes deaths trend graph, we have the numerator data for New Mexico, numerator and denominator data for the US comparison, and the denominator data for New Mexico. And then there are data issues associated with those data sources, and that's where that comes from on the report. All right. And then prevalence by age and sex, similar to what we had for the survey prevalence measure, with a crude rate data set needed for the view by age and sex, with no US comparison here. Okay, and then another reminder, I guess, that for any age-adjusted measure, there's a data note associated with the measure, so you don't need to add a data note for the values being age-adjusted if you're using an age-adjusted measure. All right. Oh, there we go. Oh, and the value type is also part of the measure. In this case, it's a percentage, which means it's going to get a percent sign. Dollars would get a dollar sign. And these are just the, you wouldn't compare a rate per thousand to a rate per 100,000. Different measures have different value types. And the desirable value associated with the measure also. All right, so let's see, what am I doing here? If you've done a little homework, the first page should be easy. So we're adding our data set information. We made the name, create the title, numerator data source, name, measure title. This is Hawaii, by the way. And then we choose our measure, data set data sources, skipping around a little bit. Dataset dimensions. So now we're back to diabetes deaths in New Mexico. So Rena, this is your question about, can you have different year groups? You may, within a data set. And typically, well, it's whatever you need, but single calendar years sometimes, or, for BRFS, it's even or odd years, or groups of years, even years, odd years. So the first thing you select with the dataset dimensions is the period dimension. And then the dimension set definitions is a little more complicated. So for diabetes deaths, these are all of the dimensions other than period dimensions that are being used. And so we've got county, small area, urban, rural, other geos, race, ethnicity, and sex. Oh, why is this dot over here? All right, for this, in this tab, there's a distinction between first dimension and second dimension. And every data set must have a first dimension. Second dimension is if you're going to do by another variable, it has to be in a different can't be in the same dimension list. And this is a little tricky if you have an indicator with lots of views. Sometimes it's really hard to figure out which should be first and which should be second. This is kind of or totally an arbitrary thing that has to do with the admin database structure. And what I do is I'll put age and geo as the first dimension and sex as the second dimension. That's typically the one that gets used as the second dimension. Age and sex. In this case, Wayne has a race by sex data view. So race and sex need to be in different dimensions. And then we've got New Mexico overall. And so here's a trick question. Can you see this down at the bottom? I don't think my screen is going down that far. It says
the last thing I see is gender identity.
Oh, the last thing you see is gender identity. Okay.
In the list of the views.
I see US overall.
Oh, you do? Okay, good. Why have we not selected US overall in our geo first dimensions? We have US comparisons, like in the county and the trend graph. Why wouldn't we select US overall? It's kind of a trick question. I can't tell you how many times I've selected it and then had to go back and unselect it. Because in any given data set, the data source is one of the defining characteristics. And US data are not in the New Mexico Bureau of Vital Records death data set. So we have a separate data set for US data, so we don't select it here because in this data set, we're only looking at dimensions that we can get from the New Mexico Vital Records data. So it gets a little complicated, a little tricky. And this is just kind of a rough mock-up of the dataset records table. So for a dataset records, for any given value, measure value, which I didn't include here, we have a dataset name, we need a period dimension, name and value, dimension 1, name and value, and dimension 2, name and value. So if for Wayne, for his race by sex data point, we need a record in the dataset records table that has these two dimensions in separate fields. And that's what I meant when I said it's a totally arbitrary thing to have to choose the first dimension and second dimension. It just has to do with the fact that both of these dimensions need to be on the same record, to be referenced on the same record in order for a value, to get defined correctly. I know it's clear as mud, but when you get into it, feel free to give me a jingle.
I will jingle you whenever I have to add the 612 census tract
Okay.
dimension. I guess it's coming eventually.
One dimension, 612 dimension values. 612 census tracts, really? In 2020?
Yeah,
We went from
the majority of
499
them,
to 612.
612, and the majority of them they just split into two.
Mm-hmm.
But in a couple of cases they consolidated, and then they would. It's just a mess. But
Yeah, it always is. Every 10 years.
every 10 years, and I'll be retired before the next one.
Yep. All right, so the next tab down from dataset dimensions is ancillary values. So this defines what you want to display in the data table. So you can choose them here, and for diabetes death, it's confidence intervals, numerator and denominator, and you can choose the sort order, which will control the order that the columns appear in the data table and also in your data entry data page. And I just highlighted these survey ancillary values. We have unique ancillary values for the surveys because they have different titles. Number and category versus count, and total number of respondents versus population count. Other things, denominator birth, I can't remember exactly where that's used, although I partly do. Rank, percentage, these are just things that they're kind of one-offs that we wanted on tables in either queries or indicator reports. But, mostly what we're using are these top 6 ancillary values. And for the data entry page, again, this is dataset records. Percent, low values are best. This is the value, lower, upper, count, and population. Hawaii uses population for their surveys. And so this is the dataset records page, different from the views records page. It's always easier for me to envision the views records than the dataset records page. And that's typically what we'll use to enter the data. So if I go to diabetes, death, data sets, and I go to age adjusted, data set records, it's like there's a whole lot of stuff here. We've activated 2021. We're not using it yet. 2020, we don't have data for a single county. So it's just a little complex looking at the data set records view, because you have all these options and they're it's just hard to really be clear about what you're looking at. Race, ethnicity, and sex. I prefer not to use the dataset records page. Every once in a while, for the view. So if data view is what? It's choosing certain things from the data set, this views records, and sometimes admin gets a little confused if there are a lot of views, or like, what was it recently? I was looking at, I'm trying to think of what it was. It was teen births, and the data set, or the view for county, it was getting confused because I have a series that's just to identify that these aren't all teen births. It's just births for girls in a certain age range. But I don't have, for the data set, I don't use other values of that dimension. It's just something I did to identify that it's just one of these age groups. The MCH program decided they didn't want to report these other data, so we don't use them anymore. But anyway, the dataset records page was getting confused. Oops. No, I'm sorry. The views records page was getting confused. Because there were some old data in there for another age group that were no longer being used, but they were in the database. And so I kind of had to go to the data set records page to figure out what was going on, to see, the different combinations and where I was going astray. But we don't have those data in. No, we should have these data in. Oh, dimension 2. Doing. So yeah, it's just kind of, if it works, use the view records page to enter data and just kind of ignore the data set records page. It can be useful to sort things out, but I think it's more confusing. Okay. I know, clear as mud again. And these are just always there. This is going back to that slide about the ancillary values and the order. And then these are always at the end. Display label, admin note, and value attribute. And I think these are Hawaii's value attributes. which I think you understand. Blah, 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 blah. View list. Oh, that's it. So I
That's
got
my
done.
confused look.
Yep.
What?
Oh my.
All right. Any questions? Do you want me to go back and go over stuff more? Do you want to maybe when Chelsea does her new indicators and runs into questions, we can get on a go-to meeting and go through it? Because I mean, this is not something that I would expect you to totally remember and execute flawlessly, should we say? I
I have
think
a
it's
question. So you started off with that page with the template, you know, of how you should start thinking about what you want in your indicator report.
right.
Is that somewhere?
Oh yeah, I'll send that.
Great. That would
I
be
just
great. I think
just a little
that'd be
Excel thing.
yeah, that's great. I mean, I think that's a good place to start. And this is also a good place to start letting people who want the indicators know how they need to start thinking about it.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, you need this information. If it's not your indicator or you're not intimately familiar with what's needed, somehow you need to get this information from the program. And they
Yeah,
don't understand percent desirable low. So it's, it's a meeting with them to understand what they're wanting. And then you need to translate it into IBIS admin speak.
right. Right. Yeah. Well, I think, yeah, when Chelsea gets up her courage and we get,
So then we'll set up a meeting with Brian since it's his indicator and
Yeah.
go through basically what the vision is and what we need.
yeah, I'll initiate that, Chelsea. But I think if we have this template, that would be a good thing to share with him.
You bet.
And we could start talking about it.
Yeah.
And I
for
also
sure.
have a form that has other things in it that we need from programs to set
Okay.
up their indicator, like who's the owner and who do you want to have edit it and stuff
Right.
like that.
Okay.
I'll send that too.
Yeah, we just set up a protocol on how to submit query data for review and submission and upload, and I think it's frustrating him.
Uh-huh. Yeah. Oh well. One
Thank
thing
you.
sure, you're welcome. Anything else on this? And then I'll share my one thing about the process that you were just talking about after I stopped the recording. Anything else, kiddos?
Not at the moment, but I'm sure I will have many questions when we start doing it.
And Chelsea, if you want, when you start doing it, I don't know if everybody wants to take the time, but we could just plan a meeting for that purpose, because I think it's, as you go through and do it, you learn things that you wouldn't otherwise learn.
Yeah, I mean, that sounds great to me.
Okay.
Me too.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Yeah, we'll do it.
Perfect.
Great.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to stop the recording.